Let's consider the following schematic diagram. We have Python code, and it is going to use the operating system to gain access to a file called filename.txt. Now, the operating system will have a relationship with this file in the sense that it will know where it is in the file system. And what I intend to do is to read from this file with the Python code. So I will produce this computer program here, which I've covered in detail in previous videos in this playlist. But let's have a look at each line in turn. What this line will do, it will open the file and allow it to be read. This will then transfer what's in the file to the variable content. We then print the content, and then we have to remember to close the file to release any resources that were set aside to allow access to the file, so we don't waste resources and the operating system can reuse the memory space that those resources took up. What would happen if the file we're attempting to read from did not exist? Let's say somebody accidentally deleted it, for example, using an operating system command. So the file we can see is no longer there, and there I am showing it disappearing. What would happen in these circumstances? What would happen when the program executed to open the file that wasn't there as part of the file system? What would this code do? Well, let's have a look at what would happen. When you run this program, it'll execute this line, and because the file does not exist, what will happen is the program will crash. And you can see that coming into view is part of the feedback when the crash happened. And look to this, and you can see it's pointing out the line that we're having problems with. And look at this carefully, you can see it's the same as this. And then it goes on to this line, and it tells us FileNotFoundError. Gives us an error number, which I can talk about some other time. And it goes on to say no such file or directory. Well, of course, in this case, we're dealing with a file. And it then tells us which file doesn't exist. Obviously, it's far better if we can write our code so we don't allow it to crash in this way if the file does not exist. So we can amend the code that you can see in front of you appropriately so we don't allow it to crash in the way in which you've just observed. And we can do that as illustrated by the following bullet point. It says to handle errors, which we can see later are best referred to as exceptions, the code that I'm highlighting is put into what we call a try except block. This can gracefully handle errors without crashing. So let's consider a computer program that does precisely this. Look to this line and you can see there's a try and a colon. And if you look to this line, you can see it says except and there's a colon at the end. Now what you're looking at here is a try except block. If you look immediately after the try, you can see this code and look carefully at it, and you can see this is identical to the code here. So in other words, I've put this code here in the try except block immediately after the word try. So you can see that this code is nestled between the try and the except line. Following the except line, you can see we have this program statement, which will print to the screen, error, the file does not exist. Let's focus in on this computer program and look at typical executions through this program. We're going to say that the file does exist. So what will happen is this will open the file for reading. This will transfer the content of the file to the variable content. This will then print the content to the screen, and then of course we will close the file. So when the file exists, that's all that will execute, because when we look at the except bit here, it will not execute because the file was found. And if you look here, it says file not found error, but we found it. So when the file does exist, this bit of the code here will not execute. Okay, let's move on and consider the execution of this program when the file does not exist. What will happen under these circumstances? Of course, this program does not know that the file does not exist, so it will attempt to execute this code, which is the one that comes immediately after the try. And this is the program statement that will execute first. And what happens when this executes is Python will issue a system call to the operating system and say, can I have access to this file, please, for reading? And the operating system will reply and say, I'm sorry, I don't have that file. Upon receipt of the information from the operating system informing it, I don't have this as part of my file system, Python will create an object. And this object will be an instance of a class. And the class is called the FileNotFoundError class. Now, this object will have attributes and methods pertinent to errors that occur. And these attributes and these methods will have been declared in the FileNotFoundError class. And we can go and have a look at that if we want, which I won't do in this video. But essentially, the object will have useful information that we can use as programmers to inform us about what's going on when these errors happen. Now, when this exception, this error happens, what we can say is that the code that is within the try, the rest of the code, i.e. the bit that I'm crossing out now, will not execute. What will happen is that the code I'm highlighting now will respond to when there is an error. Because if you look, it says except file not found error. Well, that's what we've just had. The file was not found. So we will execute the code that follows the except line, which we can see is this print statement. So when we now look at the execution of the program, its runtime, what we will see is this here. The file does not exist. And this is the text here that we placed as a string inside the print statement. So you can see when I've used the try except block, the program has not crashed. It has done what I wanted it to do as the programmer because I've used the try except block and caught the file not found error.